So good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this amazing event tonight with the pairing of Adrian and Michael Sheen. Tonight's event is brought to you by Faber Members and Waterstones. After my short introduction, the evening is going to be a conversation piece between the two of them for around 35 or 40 minutes before Michael will bring in a few of the questions you have already submitted. And we'll then need to wrap everything up by 8 o'clock. So, Adrian Tomine is the brilliant writer and artist who emerged on the comic scene with his initially self-published Optic Nerve series in the mid-1990s. After signing with Drawn and Quarterly, he has gone on to publish such bestsellers and classics as Sleepwalk, Summer Blonde, Shortcomings, and most recently Killing and Dying. Since 1999, his illustrations have appeared inside and on the cover of The New Yorker and are extremely well known. Tonight, we are launching his new book, which is just out this week, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Cartoonist, finished copy here, a superb memoir come diary about the 42 years he has, in his own words, spent thinking about and drawing comics. It's a work which is as funny as it is self-lacerating as it is moving. Hi, Adrian.
Hey, Angus, how's it going? Good to see you.
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
So on to Michael Sheen, who doesn't really need much introduction, but he is the much-loved, award-winning Welsh actor who has played everything from a vampire to a werewolf on screen, Hamlet to Caligula on stage, and perhaps most famously has portrayed on film and TV real-life figures as diverse as David Frost, Tony Blair, Chris Tarrant, and the one and only Brian Clough. Most recently, Michael has starred opposite David Tennant in the BBC's superb lockdown drama Staged. And as anyone who has watched that will know, he is joining us tonight live from the stage set. So I'll hand over to Adrian and Michael.
Hello. Thanks,
All right.
Angus.
Thanks, Angus, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, thanks for doing this, Michael.
Everyone knows where I'm talking from, Adrian. Are we allowed to know where you're talking from?
I'm in a rental house. I'm on a family vacation, and I'm in the one room in the house that has a lock on the door.
And also, when did you become a priest?
It's the new it's the new vocation for me.
I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming.
My backup plan if the comics thing doesn't work out.
I wish I'd known you. I would have worn this. I would have got a black shirt and a little white t-shirt as well, had I known.
I forgot about the undershirt. I forgot how what it looks like on Zoom.
Hot priest is very big because of Fleabag, and now we've got hot comic writer priest.
I gotta apologize in advance if I start speaking in an accent. I feel like I always imagine, like, if I moved anywhere within 2 weeks, I'd start imitating the people around me, even if it was like in the South in America or something like that.
I remember when we first, well, I'll give a bit of background.
Yeah.
That we've known each other for quite a while, although we haven't seen each other for a while, but we have known each other for a while. And I remember very early on when we first sort of got together properly, I remember you saying that, please forgive me if I start copying your accent. I remember you saying that.
Yeah, I'm nervous about it. Even just getting ready for this, I started feeling like I was going to start talking like you a little bit.
But then, who am I, Adrian? Who am I?
That's true. That's a good question.
Well, yeah, so we've left, as a bit of context, I suppose. First and foremost, I am a fan, great admirer of your work, obviously. But the first thing I read of yours was the collection Sleepwalk, and there was one particular story in that called Layover, which I loved. I mean, I loved them all, but that one really kind of haunted me and stayed with me and just kept. I sort of slightly became obsessive about it, and so because the world of social media was burgeoning at that point, I was like, I'll just write to him. I'll just reach out to him, and we ended up sort of talking and then meeting, and then we sort of started working together for a little bit as well, didn't we?
Yeah, it was a great experience. I mean, I think people put so much pressure on the end result and whether the vision is fully realized on the screen. But you know, for me, the process of that was so much fun. First of all, it was, you know, we met up in New York and had a great time hanging out there, and just, you know, when you're having coffee with Michael in New York, just incredibly famous people just walk up and say hi. They just appear out of the blue and just no big deal. And it's so much fun for me to get that experience of people recognizing you from all different things, like kids who recognize you from one thing and adults who recognize you from another thing. And then we ended up hanging out in California too. It was a lot of fun.
You are now officially the only, in my top 10 writers that I love, you are the only one who has seen 2 kitchens that I did with.
That's right.
This being the second one, and the other one was when we met in Los Angeles. Yeah.
This looks a little more rustic. This looks a little.
It's very much more rustic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and that story has stayed with me, to be honest. I still go back in my head to wanting to do so. So I'm hoping that we just haven't done it yet.
All right. Okay.
One day.
It was fun. I mean, if anyone's curious, it moved so far beyond the source material and became something different altogether. I think we were both putting in bits of our own autobiography, and it was much darker than a lot of my stuff too. It was going into some pretty dark places, but very cinematic.
I remember, quite Lynchian.
Lynchian, definitely Lynchian, and especially the aspect of Lynch that kind of glamorizes and demonizes Los Angeles. We were thinking a lot about LA too. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. In fact, one of the questions that people have sent in was specifically, without, I mean, it's coincidence, but was about that particular story.
Oh,
about
no kidding.
how, in fact, why don't I, given that we're at that, we're talking about that,
Sure.
I will. So someone, I don't know who, but someone wrote, one of my favorite stories of yours is the one where the protagonist misses his flight.
Oh, yeah.
And spends the rest of the day wandering around his own city, experiencing his life from the outside. This is an instance where the loneliness to me feels almost comforting. Can you talk about moments where loneliness can be more reassuring than not, or your experiences feeling emboldened by loneliness feel somehow appropriate during the pandemic times? So that is the story layover, isn't it? For
yeah, and obviously it's a thread that continues throughout my life, you know, to the present day in terms of what I write about and how I live my life. And you know, I've spent a good percentage of my life sitting alone in a room, working, drawing, or writing, going back to my early childhood. And I think at a certain point, I was starting to feel very negative about that, thinking like I'd wasted my life. I'd spent too many hours alone. You know, I didn't interact with humans enough. And then lockdown began, and then you know, 5 months of homeschooling and all that, and now I'm back in the position of thinking, oh, be alone in a room with a piece of paper and some art supplies for a few hours. Now I'm craving it to a degree.
I know, I was going to say to you, interacting with other humans is vastly overrated, I can tell you. I long to be able to act from my shed in the garden. Surely technology has got to the point where I don't have to actually show up and act with other people now, surely.
That's interesting, because I thought that maybe me and my cartoonist friends would be the best adapted to this new reality, because we've been in lockdown our whole lives to some degree or another. But I thought maybe for you, you'd be just going crazy, like, get me on a set, get me in front of a camera.
No. I've loved, I mean, I know it seems an odd thing to say given the context, and you know, notwithstanding, it's been an awful time for us as a species, and particularly for certain, you know, people within our community and everything. But for me personally, quite selfishly, it's been actually a very special period of time in lots of ways, because I have a new baby, a young baby who's now 10 months old, but has spent, you know, a large proportion of her life in lockdown. And we've just been here in, you know, very fortunate to have a lovely house, a lovely garden, which has been amazing. That really has been great. And just sort of spending the time with the baby, which has been fantastic, and not having to have any, you know, too much distractions. Now you've got 2 children.
Yeah, older, 5 and 10. Yeah, exactly.
How's that been?
It's similar to what you said. There's a lot of kind of irreplaceable experiences that wouldn't have happened otherwise. But you know, with homeschooling, it's a whole other challenge. And you know, like my 10-year-old is very tech savvy, so she just transitioned right over to hanging out with her friends on the computer, and just at any given moment, I hear her friends' voices emanating from her room, and they're playing games and chatting and everything. But my younger daughter is, you know, we've set up Zoom play dates, and it's just a countdown to one of the kids hitting the button to hang up and just ending the call abruptly. You know, it doesn't last long, and so I feel my heart goes out to her in terms of how lonely it can be in a way, even though she's surrounded by her family 24 hours a day too.
Now they feature in the new book.
Yeah.
Do they have an opinion on that at all, or do they even know?
No, well, they both know. My 5-year-old, apparently there was a day at school where they were talking about careers and what their parents do for a living. And I guess she raised her hand and said, "My dad draws pictures of himself." So her, you know, as far back as her memory goes, I've been working on this book, and she just thinks that I just, for the fun of it, draw pictures of myself, and somehow it turns into money. And my older daughter, Nora, was very involved in the creative process. She was watching each page as it was completed. Since I work at home, I don't have like a private studio where I go to. So whatever I'm working on is just kind of on display on my desk. And so she watched it as it progressed and became increasingly interested about the progress of the book as it approached the chronology where she was going to start showing up as a character. And then she was very interested, and then the fact checking began, and you know, she had some notes for me. And
I can understand that, because I got very interested as it got closer to when we met.
Yeah, right.
Just in case.
Yes.
I was like, this would be awful if I actually feature in, because for anyone who hasn't read the new book yet, it is essentially a litany of humiliation for Adrian throughout his life. It's all the most humiliating. Well, I don't know if it's the most humiliating. It's the ones that you are prepared to share with us that have been humiliations and slights and terrible offences caused to you throughout your life. So I was worried that maybe this whole thing had been an elaborate setup to get me to see the terrible humiliation that I had foisted upon you at some point unknowing.
Right, and then I was expecting an apology to occur live on camera here.
I am sorry. So I can understand her interest in that. It made me suddenly think of one of my favorite films of all time is a film called House, Japanese film called House.
Oh yeah, we've talked about House, yeah.
Yeah, and that was written by the writer-director and his, I believe, I want to say 8-year-old daughter, but I may have that wrong, but certainly his young daughter, and they created the story together, which is why it is so mental. It's just a crazy story, but in a way that you can't put your finger on. Like when I realized, oh, it was his daughter who came up with the story, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you've probably had this, I'm sure you've had this experience where you have a kid growing up and their creativity is completely original and it's not influenced by any kind of existing culture and anything. And I mean, there's been a million times where I've thought, like, no writer's room in Hollywood could have ever come up with that idea for a story or something like that. And
there's I suppose a project really, but it's an ongoing project in an area of London called Somerstown, and called Seen and Heard, and it's a playwriting project for children who come from quite a difficult area of London with a lot of disadvantages and stuff. And this project is about encouraging and sort of supporting young kids to write these little plays, and then they do performances of them, but the performances are done by professional actors with proper like production, full costume and lighting and everything, and not one bit of punctuation or one word is changed from what the children have written, even though they're mentored a little bit. And you watch these, I mean, it's some of the most extraordinary theatre I have ever seen. It is wonderful. It's like having your batteries recharged when you go and watch it, because you're right, no one could come up with this stuff. No one could on purpose come up with it, with the things they come up with. Just so maybe would you consider writing something with your daughter?
Sure. Yeah, I think that would be fun. We've she's actually this is the older daughter, Nora. she's quite a cartoonist herself already. She's I think just from growing up with it being kind of omnipresent, she just has a natural pull towards that art form, and so she loves graphic novels, and that's like her favorite kind of book to read. And she's at this point, I think she's probably finished more pages of comics that she's drawn than I have in my career. She's got a massive stack of these stories that she works on, and she's invented these characters, and I definitely take a little pride in it, because she has these characters that are sort of thinly veiled stand-ins for her and her little sister, but they're not exactly them, and it's really inspiring to me in a lot of ways.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
brilliant. Now, for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, this is it: The Loneliness of the Long Distance Cartoonist. First of all, are you a fan of The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner? Which is,
I am. Yeah, I mean, it was something that I read in college, like so 20 something years ago, and then I later saw the film adaptation, and I don't think there was ever, I enjoyed it, but I don't think there was ever a time where I thought I'm gonna someday cannibalize that title. It was just something that just clicked for me when I was agonizing over the title for this book, which was one of the last steps in creating it. I was pretty much done with the book before I settled on the title.
Now, I don't want to give too much away about the book. I know it's not like massive spoiler alert. You're not that kind of writer, really.
Yeah.
But having said that, there are certain things about this book that I wouldn't want to spoil for people coming to it. So I will try and find ways around giving away too much about it. But well, first of all, it's when I first got it, I thought, oh, fantastic, a new Moleskine notebook. Oh, and someone spoilt it by doing silly little drawings all the way through it. That was my first thought.
Right.
And then I realized it for the work of genius that it actually is.
Thank you.
But it's so it's sort of in the form of your notebook, presumably, is it? Is that how you actually did it?
Yeah. That was the idea. There's a much rougher version of it in a similar notebook. This was sort of the cleaned up version of it to be more presentable, but to produce it in the way that you have it now took extraordinary effort because of the timing of it. So the book was set to be printed in a town in China not far from Wuhan.
Wow.
And as soon as things started getting locked down there, we thought we had to move it to a different place to meet our deadline. So I was given a few choices of other printers who were up to the task, and I thought Italy seemed like a good second option. So we moved the whole production to Italy.
With your unerring instinct for things that will cause the maximum amount of damage to you and your career.
Yes, and my publisher, yeah. And eventually they were able to produce it in Italy, but at the last minute they said, oh, you wanted this bookmark ribbon, this sort of purplish bookmark ribbon bound into it. Those are only produced in China. So we need to wait to get those produced in China and shipped to us to be assembled into the binding before we can send it off. So there it is.
Of which Adrian speaks, or of what he speaks.
Yes. So it's I'm glad that some people are enjoying the format of it, because it would have been much easier for me to say, forget it, just do a little paperback, a regular paperback book, and get it out there.
One of my favorite things about the format is that at the end of the book, there are a few pages that are just sort of blank notebook pages, and presumably that's so I can draw my graphic novel notes.
Right, your response,
in comic book form. Now, what we have here is a number of things. One of them is a sort of origin story, a superhero origin story. Isn't it?
You're the first person who picked up on that, yeah.
So yeah, it opens with what seems to be, as the way it's presented in the book, as that kind of origin story of how it all began. And it sort of began with Spider-Man.
Yeah, I think that might be, to some people, that'll be the biggest revelation, to see what an obsessive superhero fan I was as a kid. I mean, not just a fan, but a collector, like I had to have every issue Marvel was putting out, and that was a big part of what made me such an unappealing kid, because I couldn't just have a light conversation about, now if you ask a kid about Spider-Man, they'll be like, yeah, I like the new one, or I like Spider-Verse. Okay, let's go do something else. But for me, it was like opening this Pandora's box. If someone expressed the tiniest bit of interest, then it was like, I've been waiting my whole life to tell you about why I love Spider-Man and blah, blah, blah. And it was overwhelming to adults and children alike.
Yeah.
I think my mom was probably the most patient in terms of enduring some of those conversations, but a kid at school, he has no incentive to tolerate that.
And of course, in keeping with the overwhelming theme of the book, when we discover that how you feel about Spider-Man, it leads to an incredibly humiliating series of events for you.
Right, and some people have contacted me about that and said, I can't believe that you would get bullied just because you like comic books. That seems fake to me. And I always want to explain that it could have been basketball that I was a fan of. It didn't have to do with what it was. It was the way I talked about it and the way I dominated the conversation and overwhelmed people with minutia.
Yeah, so it wasn't about comic books. It was about you and your personality.
Absolutely. I'm convinced it could have been anything. I could have talked about wanting to do anything, and I would have ruined it for people.
And because of the nature of the book and the way that the story develops, am I right in saying that there's almost, well, from a certain point on, it's sort of each section is a chronological year. It moves forward by year. Do you keep a record of everything that happens to you that you find humiliating anyway, that you're able to draw onto this?
Only mentally, only in my mind. I don't have like a dog-eared book of humiliations that I jot down everything in. But at this point, most of my writing process happens just in my mind anyway. I don't really. Well, I go to great lengths to avoid that feeling of sitting down to a blank piece of paper and saying like, now write a book, So I do a lot of pre-planning and a lot of writing in my mind. And so a lot of the writing process of this book was actually just, sometimes I'd use prompts, like I'd find some old photos, or I would do a little research online or something and remember something, and then reconstruct the events in my brain. Yeah, it was mostly working, and I think that's why I would stress that it's not hard journalism. It's a lot of it is my memories of these experiences, which I'm sure the other people involved would fact check in a different way.
Well, already, as I said to you earlier, there is already a bone of contention for Neil Gaiman, who appears in this book a couple of times. And
well, this is the greatest. This is the greatest thing. We should explain that you've already talked to Neil about this, or you mentioned it to him or something.
That's right. So I'm sort of fairly in contact with Neil quite a bit anyway. And so I said that I was doing this with you, and of course I couldn't help but say, and you're in it, Neil. You're in the book a few times. In fact, there's something called the Gaiman incident that appears in the book. Now I won't give away what that is.
Okay, great.
But he, and of all the things that he could have said, the one thing he said was, that wasn't in 99, that was in 2000. So he fact-checked you on a date error, potentially.
Without even having read the book, he already spotted an error of mine. That's perfect. Well, I'm glad that of all the people that you're friends with that you could show it to, that it was him and not some of the other people who are in the book, because nothing, although he comes up quite a few times in the book, there's never anything that he specifically does that harms me in any way. It's just that he's such a huge success, and I'm often in his shadow.
I also once met Daniel Clowes.
Oh, did you?
In Los Angeles at Meltdown.
Oh, okay.
Which has Meltdown shut down now?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I have a feeling. Oh God, I don't know. Well, hopefully not, but because I haven't been there for a while. But anyway, he came for they organised a big sort of signing thing there, and I went along. In fact, I'd been filming all day on that series Masters of Sex I was doing.
Oh my God!
I thought I can't miss this, so I went there and just sort of hung around awkwardly, and And then we ended up going for dinner afterwards, which was one of the highlights of my life there.
That was kind of a hangout for you a little bit, right? Meltdown, you
Yes.
sort of attended the comedy shows and...
Exactly, yeah. So they did the comedy shows in the back, and then obviously this amazing comic book store in the front as well. So it was ticking a lot of my boxes.
Yeah.
I had a great time there, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you done stuff? You must have done stuff there.
I've done events there. I think probably the first time I was ever brought to LA to do a signing was with Meltdown, and it was incredible. I mean, I'd been used to doing events more like I depict in the book, where I'm in a shop in Albany, and the guy has to call his roommates to pretend like they're fans. But the Meltdown experience was a whole nother thing. I mean, it was just an incredible store, and they threw a amazing party afterwards. And just because they're so connected to so many worlds, it was just this incredible diversity of people who showed up for the party. And
right. And the reason I bring Daniel Clowes up is because he features in the book, and that did you really live like next door to him for a while or something?
Yeah, I think it's one of the few times that I've sort of thought that there was some fate in the world, or some sort of that miracles could happen in some way, because I'd been a fan of both Dan Clowes and a cartoonist named Richard Sala for a long time, since I was probably 12 years old, and I had collected their work, and I'd written them fan letters. And when I moved to Berkeley to go to college, I just randomly picked an apartment on College Avenue with some friends, and we just moved into this rundown house. And just by pure coincidence, it turned out that I was about 2 blocks south on the same street of Dan Clowes, and 2 blocks north on the same street of Richard Sala. And they'd already figured that out, and they'd become friends and neighbors. And I just happened to pick an apartment that was right between the two of them. And I'd say from that point on, for the next 10 years, we got together at least once a week, always on a Wednesday for lunch, and then sometimes other things beyond that. But for 10 years, we had kind of a standing Wednesday lunch date that I always talk about as sort of my shoestring version of an arts education.
Yeah. Well, how did someone who alienated everyone as a kid with how obsessive they were about Spider-Man comics become someone who at 12 was reading Dan Clowes stuff? What was that journey?
That's a good question. Because it's a good question to me, because there's plenty of examples of people who don't make that transition, and so that's what makes. I mean, to me, it made perfect sense, because by age 10, I'd completely lost interest in the comics that I had been buying. I probably should have put it in the book, but there was a grim moment where I realized that I turned into a pure collector, that I would kind of, like as a ritual, go to the comic book store on Saturday and buy the comics. I wouldn't even shop for them. I would have already filled out a list telling them what comics I wanted, so that they would have those to hand to me when I walked in. And I would just like robotically grab them and give them the money, and then go home and put them in plastic bags and file them away, and just sort of look with satisfaction at the obsessively arranged box of comics.
Just feel the vibrations coming off them like a Rothko painting.
Yeah, but with no actual joy about the actual comics themselves. Just as this.
There's a Mike Leigh play called Abigail's Party, and there's a character in it who has a collection, a leather-bound or fake leather-bound collection of Shakespeare's collected works, and he's showing them off. And someone says, "Well, what's your favorite Shakespeare play?" And he goes, "Oh no, they're not to be read."
Right? Yeah. Oh yeah, that was me. Except instead of Shakespeare, it was the Micronauts or something like that.
I mean, apples and oranges.
Yeah, close enough. But so by the time I was 12, I completely lost interest in that kind of material, and fortunately, I just happened to live near a store that had a little other section kind of tucked away that I wasn't sure if I was allowed to go into, but I took a step in and no one said anything.
Something for the weekends.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a mix of everything, but that was where I discovered Love and Rockets and Daniel Clowes and Peter Bagg and all those people, and it was kind of a seamless transition. It was sort of like, now I'll start going to the same store every week to buy that stuff.
Yeah. And when you did start sort of hanging out with them, did you freak out a bit? Did you,
Oh, yeah.
like, I mean, I've only just got over with, like, Neil going, oh, this is Neil Gaiman.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's quite a difficult line that you so want to be able to get along with someone who you've admired so much when you get the opportunity to be with them. And yet it's so easy to mess up.
It's so easy to mess up, and it's so hard, I find, to fully be present and enjoy the time because you have that imposter syndrome hanging over you all the time. And you know, I feel like I'm constantly battling against that. Like even now, I'm saying, like, let's just enjoy this opportunity to chat with Michael here, and as opposed to thinking about the different roles that I've seen you in over the years and things like that. And you know, with those guys, fortunately, I spent so much time with them. Like, to have like that weekly standing date, I didn't feel like I was auditioning or anything like that. So I eventually adapted. But you know, even to this day, I mean, I will still have those experiences if I get an email or something from one of these cartoonists who I've known for decades now, and we're just friends. But I'm still a fan, you know, as much as anything.
Yeah, I mean, I've managed on the whole, I think, to not mess it up too much with people. I don't think. I mean, I think I handled it okay with you. I think, although we haven't spoken for quite some time, that may be on purpose. But the person I did mess it up with a bit was there are two people. One was David Lynch.
Oh, no.
And I only messed it up in so much as I interviewed him for a radio show that I did.
Really?
So I've been doing a couple of radio shows for BBC Radio 2 here in Britain. And they were live shows. And the first one, I think, was about like the first type of music I was into, the first sort of music trend I was into, which was new romantic music, which was Ultravox and early Duran Duran and all that kind of stuff. And so that was the first one. Second one was about how my musical taste changed throughout the 80s, because I was like 11 at the beginning of the 80s and 20 at the end. So I sort of did a thing about, and I would have people on the show who I was a huge fan of, you know, who came in and I interviewed them and that kind of stuff. So then they said, what about a third show? And I said, well, I'm going to be in America. I'll be in LA. They said, well, you know, you can do it live from LA. Great. So then I thought, what theme would that be? And I decided it would be sort of about Lynch. So music that was in Lynch's films, or music that was sort of that kind of feel, or things that he was into that he liked. And I interviewed David Lynch for it. It was a pre-recorded interview. So I went to his studio, and it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. And I was absolutely trying not to just freak out all the way through it. And I got right to the end of it, and it went really well, and I had a great time. And he seemed to be, he was very generous, and he seemed to like enjoy it. And I got right to the end, and I messed it up, because I ended up going, well, I did two things. One, in the interview, I said, well, thank you very much, David, for this. And, you know, in case I never get the chance to see you again, I want to say on behalf of myself and everybody else in the world who's live viewed, and I started doing this whole thank you. I mean, you know, and I realized, as I was doing that, I realized I will never see this man again. And then the second thing I did was that I ended up like sending him stuff afterwards, like, here's some stuff that I think you might like. And oh God, it was, in fact, it included a Dan Clowes graphic novel.
Oh my gosh.
Like he's never come across it. Like,
well, where were you in your career at this point, though? Were you an actor that he knew?
Yeah. Well, in fact, I bumped into him once before at a book festival in LA, and he just had a book out, and I was with my daughter, and I'd sort of just randomly come across this book festival, and I saw that he was there, and I remember walking up to the stall that he was on, and it was weird. It was like the crowd parted, and suddenly I found myself standing in front of David Lynch, and he looked up and he went, "Oh, Michael, hi, how are you?"
Nice.
I was like, "Oh my God," and I completely got flustered and sort of ran off. And then, so this was the next time. So he did know me, so I completely messed it up, I think.
Now you said didn't you say there were two people that you blew it with?
Yes. The second person was the great Laurie Anderson, another musician, performance artist, who's married to Lou Reed.
Yeah.
And when I was 12, sort of inexplicably, Oh Superman was a hit in the charts in Britain. So when I was a 12-year-old boy in Port Talbot in South Wales, I heard this on the radio one day, and thought, that's my bag.
Yeah.
And I bought the single, not realizing that this was like nothing else that had been in the charts ever. And it sort of, and that song, that record just kind of had a big impact on me, a big effect on me. It was so strange and weird and just extraordinary. And it's very kind of divisive. Some people hate it because it's sort of annoying, and other people love it, and I love it. And so it had and I sort of, you know, when my daughter was old enough, I used to play it to her, and she's sort of got a thing about it as well. And so a couple of years ago, not that long ago, John Cale of the Velvet Underground, who is Welsh,
that's right.
I know a bit.
That's right.
He invited me to an exhibition in New York about the Velvet Underground that he was sort of opening up. And so I went along, and just before I left, I just thought, I'll go and say goodbye to John. So I went over to John, and you know, people were talking to him. And then as I was saying goodbye to him, Laurie Anderson came up, and I was absolutely starstruck. And John said, "Oh, Laurie, this is Michael." And I just went, "Oh, your song, "Oh Superman," has had a profound effect on my life, and thank you very much." And I did that whole thing, and she just sort of looked at me and went, "Okay, bye," and just walked off.
Yeah. You turned back to your 12-year-old self, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
And John Cale turned to me and said, "You did better with her than I did." Those are the two most, you know, oh God, I messed up experience.
Yeah, that's not those aren't worst. That's if those are the two worst of your life, that's pretty good, I gotta say. Those are
close to what you've got in your new book.
Right. There are no bathroom related humiliations there or anything like that.
No. I mean, that period of time that you sort of chart, you know, you show some stories in this of when you were, as you said, going to do signings and no one was showing up, and you'd sleep in on the comic book stores,
The floor,
floor, and that. I mean, how typical is that for people who are coming up through the ranks? And how was that exciting? Was it fun? Was it like when rock bands talk about the early days, or was it just awfulness?
I think for some people it is that rock band experience, and they thrive on it and they love it. I hated it from minute one. There was, you know, even though I should have felt like I'm 20 years old and I'm going on a book tour and I'm traveling around the country, I was still just enough of a curmudgeon that I was thinking like I'd rather be home, sleeping in my own bed, you know, or staying in a hotel. Maybe that would have made things better. But it was
that part of what drove you to have the success that you've had, was just not have to do that anymore?
Maybe so. It was sort of like, I just need to get up just one tier so that I can get a room at the Holiday Inn instead of sleeping on the comic shop owner's floor or something like that. But you know, and now it's a lot more diverse. When you go on a tour, you go to a book festival, and then you go to a bookstore, then you go to a comic store. But back then it was just these little independently owned comic book stores. That was it. You just go from town to town to those, usually by Greyhound bus or by train. And you know, it was a lot more intimate. You would, as soon as you landed in that town, that store owner was kind of your guide and your host for the next couple of days. So you would suddenly you're eating 3 meals a day with some guy you've never met before, and sleeping in their living room. And you know, there's a classic story about, it's not in the book, and we were just talking about that I should have put in the book, but my friend Seth, a fellow cartoonist, he was the first person I went on a tour with, and we actually flew to this place. I won't say what city it was, but we flew there. And the first thing our host said to us was, "Great news, guys. I got you tickets to the Kiss concert tonight." And, you know, I guess of the two of us, I would be slightly more likely to want to go to a Kiss concert, and, you know, more so than Seth. And it was such an awkward situation to have to tell this guy who was so excited because he was such a fan, and we're saying like, "Oh, I think we're a little tired. I think we're gonna, you know, stay at your apartment and relax while you go to the Kiss concert without us." And then, you know, he and his friends, they put on their makeup and got dressed up like members of Kiss, and yeah, Yeah, while we sat in the living room of his apartment and just kind of hung around by ourselves. But you know, there's a lot of things like that where I think the cartoonists are the big disappointments, where the hosts are so excited to have these people come visit and they want to show them a good time. This happens anytime we went to Europe for a festival, a comics festival. There was always this moment where the switch turned and suddenly they hated us. You know, like in Finland, when I didn't want to row on a boat to go to an island at night where there was a naked sauna where we were all going to sit around. And when I finally said, I think I'm a little uncomfortable in boats. I don't think I get a little seasick.
In a parallel universe, Adrian, there is a version of you sitting in a naked sauna with your Kiss makeup running down your face.
And very well liked by my host too. Like, oh, he's a great guy. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Of course, when you show up, of course, that is a big moment for, I guess, for the host. You know, they want to put on an event for you, and whereas for you, it's just, you know, it's the next night, I guess.
Well, it's exciting too. I mean, I like arriving in a new town, and it's flattering to go to these events where the local people come to meet you and everything like that. But yeah, there's so many things that have developed, expectations that have developed of a cartoonist that did not exist when I signed on for the job. I mean, you know, when I think the reason that I wanted to become a cartoonist, a big reason was that I thought, okay, this is the one job where you never have to do any public speaking, you don't have to travel, you don't have to be a person to the world. You're just this anonymous figure behind, like, you know, I remember thinking, like, I don't know what John Romita looks like. You know, I just like the way he draws Spider-Man. And so, you know, fortunately for the industry, that's all changed over the last decades. But for me, it's been, you know, one adjustment after another. Like, oh, now I have to go travel and sleep on these guys' floors, and now I have to get up on stage and speak to people and do interviews and things that I am not well suited for.
It's funny because when we met up in LA that time, and I came to, you were doing a sort of Q&A event and a signing in a bookstore in LA, and I remember being struck by how at ease you seemed with it, how confident you seemed with it, because from only engaging with your work up until that point, I was like, this is a guy who's not gonna enjoy that.
You were ready for a disaster. You were like, this is gonna be a shit show.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, this is gonna be delicious.
You were a terrible disappointment, Adrian.
Yeah,
because you handled it brilliantly. But you did seem very at ease. Is that someone who has become very good at pretending that you're okay with it, and underneath you're still suffering, or have you really become at ease with it?
No, 100%. It's the only thing about me that thinks that I might have some acting ability, because I have definitely learned. It's like, even before this, I feel like, all right, let me mentally prepare. Let me put on this facade of a guy who is at ease at these kinds of things. And then I go out and do it. And then usually I go back to my hotel room and collapse on my bed.
There's a great bit in the book where you're doing an interview on NPR, I guess, with and it's a show that you know have listened to and revere. And there's a great section where you're in the interview, but then you sort of depict yourself as having an out-of-body experience. And is that quite a common thing? Like, as something is happening, you're commenting on it, and it stops you from being in the moment, so to speak? Oh
yeah, that's a rampant throughout my life, not just related to professional work. You know, it's something that I actually, to be serious, it's something that I work on, because I think that it's detrimental to relationships and to the enjoyment of life in a lot of ways, especially with children. But you know, when I still have this sometimes, but especially when my first daughter was very young, I'd be in the middle of doing something like playing with her at the park or feeding her or something like that, and I'd sort of have that same experience, and the thought would be like, you've been tasked with caring for a human life. You have no training in this. You have no experience with this. All you can do is take care of yourself and your selfish needs. And suddenly there's a beautiful little baby here who's totally trusting that you know what you're doing, and you don't.
Oh God. I mean, now it's interesting because I recognize that as well, but for me, it's a professional hazard. And I think for most actors that in the moment of doing what we do, that can really mess it up. Like there's always the opportunity for a part of you. And I suppose in a way you do need that. There's always a bit of you that's watching and observing and commenting and maybe reacting to things in hopefully a positive way, but it can also become a very negative thing in that if you are too aware of what's going on and you're not in the moment of what you're doing, then it kind of kills it, and you can't be spontaneous and you can't be relaxed and all those sort of things. Now for you, given that the sort of experience that you're describing, that presumably doesn't happen when you're actually working. Like as you're doing your work, it's not happening then, is it? It's not getting in the way of what you're doing then, is it?
I have to fight it. I have to fight against it sometimes. And certainly there was a long stretch of my career where I started to feel gripped by self-consciousness, when I started being aware that my work would get reviewed and that people were going to respond to it. And then I would go out and face them in public. And it started really paralyzing me for a few years. And I was really kind of I wanted to pander, but I didn't even know how to do it correctly. So I felt like, I'm happy to give you what you want, but I'm not sure what it is, which is kind of like the antithesis of being an artist in a way. It's more.
Is that the autobiography name? Adrian Tomine, Bad Panda.
Bad Pander. I think that's true. It's definitely.
Would that affect you in terms of like in your approach to what you're doing? So like what you might write about, the sort of stories you would do, or would it actually affect the moment of you doing it? Like as you're sitting there drawing, writing, that it would affect you then? Or were you able to lose yourself in that moment?
Both, but definitely both aspects of that. But I have, through great effort, kind of overcome that in recent years. And part of it is this trick that I do where even if I think that, so let's say I'm working on The Loneliness of the Long Distance Cartoonist. I think maybe this isn't really my next book. Maybe this is just a little experiment I'm doing between books. I'm not going to pitch it to my publisher. I'm not going to take an advance and then have a deadline hanging over me. And so like with this one, I didn't even talk to my publisher about its existence until I was about halfway done with it. And at that point, I started to feel some confidence that I wanted to see it through to completion.
And is that a conscious trick that you sort of play on yourself in order to not put too much pressure on yourself?
Yeah, and especially with a book like this that's so exposing in a way. I wanted to have this this escape hatch if I started to think like, no, I can't put this out into the world or something like that. And it really freed me up. And it's really, I realized that it's sort of all a convoluted way to try and transport myself back to the experience of when I started making comics, when I was a kid in my parents' house, in my bedroom, doing something that no one was going to see, that I was doing just for my own fun and for my own education, really. And really, that's the only time I think I realized that was the time that I really enjoyed making comics the most, when it was when it was a hobby, when it was for fun rather than for a career. And so even I got to trick myself to get back to that.
The Carl Jung, the great psychologist Carl Jung, when he went through a period of time where he had a sort of a breakdown, or he came to a kind of a stop, and he found that the way to get him out of that and to break through it was to go back to doing what he used to do as a kid, when there was no end to it. It was just the sheer act that he used to make little pathways in the sand on the beach or on the riverbank in the mud and that kind of stuff. And so he started doing that again, and it unlocked all kinds of stuff in him. And then the rest of his career was essentially about working out all the stuff that came as it got unlocked. And so I think it is interesting because it's the same with acting in a way. One of the first things all children do is act, like role play, pretend, play games and stuff. And that's sense of play where it's not really about performing to anyone. It's just the sheer joy of inhabiting play. And having that spirit as an actor is what you have to try and hold on to always. And of course, all the other stuff just kills that.
That's great to hear you say, because I feel like that's, without articulating it, I feel like that's something that I've seen throughout your career, that I see you taking delight in whatever role it is, and making it fun for you. I mean, you know, I think even at the time we've talked about some of your famous moments from the Twilight series that have turned into memes and have gone viral and everything. But to me, it's like, you know, you're in the middle of this giant machine, but you're finding a way to do your own bizarre thing and have a great time with it.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, it's finding what it is that gives you joy in whatever it is, isn't it? And
yeah,
I mean, I've talked about this before when I did a podcast with David Tennant that he does, and there's the T.S. Eliot quote from, I think it's from The Wasteland, where he says, "These fragments I have shored against my ruin." And that line has always really resonated for me, that the idea that throughout our life, there are little things that we come across that give us joy or spark something in us. And, you know, especially when I was younger, the things that gave me that sort of joy when I was a teenager, I think at the time I always felt like, oh, eventually this isn't important. Like, I'll leave all this behind, and I'll find the things that I'm really into later on or whatever. And as I've got older, I realized, no, those things that gave me that joy, they're the things that have been the most meaningful through my life. Those are the fragments that have stopped me from kind of going under a lot of the time, because they're the things that give me joy. And it doesn't matter where they come from. Yeah. And often it's the ones that come from the most unlikely places that other people would just scoff at, perhaps, or whatever. Yeah. But those are the things that are really meaningful to you, and that stay with you and guide you on your path. And they've certainly informed my work. It's that sense of, like, it doesn't matter whether it's Twilight or Frost Nixon or whatever it might be. Like, each thing is about where's the joy in it, and connecting.
Well, I mean, it makes me think about, I feel like a lot of times people will think how fortunate that you or I might be that we've been able to make a career, make a living out of doing this. But in addition to that, I think about how many people don't have the avenue or that experience to do what we're talking about, of connecting back to the joy of childhood and really appreciating it as an adult. You know, I think there's more professions than not that don't allow that at all. And I think it's a real privilege for us.
And I suppose in a way, the flip side of that, or not the flip side of it, a consequence of that is that can be very delicate, that sense of joy, and the things that give you your drive, or the things that you want to protect, that kind of nourish you and all that. And, you know, your book, in a way, is a sort of journey through the experiences where that gets dented, crushed, knocked around. You know, there's very much a sense of that. You know, I worry for you. I read this book and I go, how are you getting through your days if this is what's actually going on underneath? But there is a sort of connection between those two things, isn't there? Don't you think?
I think so, and I hope that if someone reads the book, they read through to the very end and see that it's kind of a story of determination, that in spite of all these things, that I can't be stopped, you know. And I, even now, I think if something were to happen and I embarked on some totally different career, I would still be making these little comics privately, maybe for myself. I would just need to do it till the day I die.
That's what I always used to say, was that I feel very fortunate, like you said, that I get to earn a good living doing this, and it's my job and all the rest of it. But I always used to say I would do it on the streets of Port Talbot, even if I wasn't. And then I did end up doing it on the streets of Port Talbot, because I did one of the most meaningful things in my career was this project that I did, you know, all through the town. But I think there is something about that if you do feel like, I mean, people talk about it as a vocation rather than a job, but that sense of, like, I would just do this anyway because I just love it, and it's the thing that gives me the most pleasure. Mm-hmm. That gives you a sort of a resourcefulness, I think, some sort of form of confidence that I think connects with people, and in some ways ensures that you do end up doing quite well at it. But it's not for that reason. It's just there's something about someone who kind of goes, right, regardless of what happens in my career, I will just keep doing this anyway because I just love it and I need to.
And I think for our two chosen careers, I think there's so many roadblocks and so many things that would prevent you from going down it, that it would be very hard to do that without that sort of that need. You know, I don't think someone could just I'll decide to be a professional actor and, you know, just give it my best shot and we'll see what happens. You know, you kind of have to, and the same with comics. I think it's so, the rewards can sometimes be small and the obstacles can be great, and you have to have that, it must be done no matter what attitude.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing that we've only got a few minutes left, and I said that I was going to go to the questions. Now I have already incorporated some of the questions throughout, so I hope that is okay.
Yeah, I see Angus is hopping on, so maybe he's wrapping us up here. Oh, his mic's not on. Can you hear him, Michael?
I can't hear you, Angus. Are you muted?
I'm here now. You can
okay,
hear
there
me?
we go. Yeah.
Yeah, sadly, I do have to wrap things up. But I think that was amazing. Thank you both so much. Particularly Michael, thank you for being so generous with your time.
Absolutely.
And so insightful as well. As a Faber editor, I love two things of this event. Firstly, that you're the first person to publicly pull this as Adrian's origin story. Respect for that. And also your Eliot quote.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So double respect to you, Michael, for both of those. Thank you very much. And Adrian, thank you. It's great to see you, even over in this format.
Yeah.
But I realized today we've been working together. We've been publishing your books in the UK for I think 13 years now.
Is it right? Is that right? Yeah.
Which seems incredible. But
well,
I hope we'll be publishing them for 13 more years at least.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time, but it's a real honor for me. I've told you this before, but I've grown up with those Faber screenplay books with that logo on the spine on my shelf since I was a kid practically. So to do an edition of this book and I get to on the computer drop in that double F logo right on the spine, it's kind of like a childhood dream come true. And you're also the only foreign publisher that went along with our crazy production of making it look like a moleskin. Right. You're the only one, and so it holds a special place in my heart.
Great stuff. Well, thanks again both. I am meant just to say quickly that everyone who's been listening, you are, having signed up for this event, you're eligible for a £5 discount for the book when you go to Waterstone's website. So don't forget that. You use the code LONELY5, which is the word lonely and the number 5 afterwards. So do please use that. Thank you to Waterstones for partnering on this event with us. And finally, I should say, if anyone wants to check out some pictorial evidence of Adrian's dodgy 90s fashion sense, they should head to his Instagram page. There's been some amazing posts in support of this book in the last week or two. Michael's already called out your priest outfit this evening. So thank you both very much again, and hopefully see you again soon.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks everybody. It's been great speaking to you. Speak soon. Thanks, Angus.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Thanks, Michael. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.